But now we are asking if 99% mortgages are a good idea. 0207 862 2222 is the number. We'd love to hear from you on this. Maybe it would help you get on the property ladder. Now, the government is said to be thinking about offering them in next month's budget in a bid to get more first-time buyers onto the property ladder. It would mean buyers could take out a mortgage with just a 1% deposit. You can already get 95% mortgages, and according to the government's analysis, they've been taken up by 40,000 people. So there's some proof that there is an appetite for this, but critics say that it could actually make the housing crisis worse because it doesn't get it to the root of the actual problem, which is a lack of housing in the first place. But Lynn, I suppose in the immediate term, 99% mortgages, are they going to be beneficial?
I can see why a small group of people would jump at this, because there are quite a few people on decent salaries, but they just don't have the money to save that huge deposit, but they're paying essentially similar in rent. So I don't think we should absolutely shun the idea in its entirety. And when people are saying, you know, it's going to cause huge inflation with house prices, yes, it probably will, but not to the extent people are suggesting, for the simple fact that I just don't think enough people will qualify for this. Even if we look at, let's take a house for, and I'm being quite generous here with my stats, £495,000 for a house, a term of 25 years at a rate of 4% interest rate, right? On a 1% deposit, because it's 99% mortgage, that person would have to pay $2,630.
Yeah, unless they took out a longer mortgage term, which adds another issue to this.
But you can only do an extra 5 years. So I've done it on 25 years.
35% mortgage.
35 years, you mean?
Yeah, 35 years.
Yeah, it would still not reduce it massively. You'd still, on average, you'd still have to pay monthly over £200 for a property, on average £500,000. Now, if you look at the average salary of everybody here in the UK, if we average, it's around 37,000. So I'm being generous. Someone on 40,000, salary of 40,000, they're not even getting 2,600. So the mortgage will be more than what they're actually getting as a salary.
Well, that's interesting that actually this could just be all talk, sort of to look good, but
of course it's all talk, Storm. Of course it's all talk.
Yeah, it's just a headline, isn't it?
Do you know how many times the Tories have regurgitated this policy and never implemented it because of this exact reason? Because it's not actually, it doesn't make sense. Now, again, I think it's really unfair because there are people who are paying rents every month and it's like, well, I could be putting this towards a mortgage.
Yeah.
But if we don't combat the issue here, which is supply, then all this is going to do is, one, there will be a pushing up, because if there is an appetite for this, it's going to mean that already very limited supply is going to be further limited, so house prices are going to go up. In addition, interest rates, because these are riskier, are going to be higher. So not only are you going to have these really big monthly repayments, but they're going to be more than your typical person would have to pay.
And even following on from that, imagine if we face the same issue we did with Liz Truss's government, where interest rates soar. You're already stretched, paying over $2,500 for a mortgage.
Well, you could end up in negative equity is one of the other big problems. Okay, you two seem very much in agreement with this. Let's now speak to Paula Higgins, the CEO of the HomeOwners Alliance. What's your thoughts on 99% mortgages? Are they a good idea?
I completely agree. They're sort of similar, that it's actually a good idea for the people now who are looking to try to get on the property ladder, and people who don't have a bank of mum and dad to help them. People who maybe have, quite good income coming in, but it's really not going to fix the whole problem. We know that, house prices are 16 times higher in the last 30 years, but wages have only increased by 7 times. So it's really impossible for younger people now to get onto the housing market. So it can be good, but it's not going to make a huge difference, and completely spot on. We have not been building enough houses for 40 years. But that's not going to change anytime soon. Successive governments haven't been able to cope with it. Ever since council stopped building houses in the 80s, the private sector has not kept up. So there's a real fundamental problem. We are in crisis, and this is not going to solve it.
Well, but what would you say to people that would say that 99% mortgages would only compound the problem and make the housing crisis even worse?
I don't think it's going to affect a very few people, because we do know that people, even with the 95% mortgage scheme we have, there are people who won't take it up. They will save a bit longer to get that deposit, because actually over the longer term, you'll be paying more. You'll be having a longer term, and also there might be some sort of idea that it's going to be a fixed rate. So there will be people who will not decide not to, because you'll be paying more in interest. So I don't think it's going to make a massive difference in terms of the housing crisis now, and it could really help people who are in that situation to get onto that property ladder and actually make it more equitable, because actually maybe they don't have a bank of mum and dad, because we do know, we've got research coming out next week showing that people are really, really reliant on government schemes, other types of help, longer mortgages to get onto the property ladder, and we need to help these people now.
But as you know, what I was just going to bring up your point, Lynn, and the fact that we've seen the fact that interest rates can move quite swiftly if the wrong policies are put in place. If we gave out 99% mortgages to first-time buyers, let's say, aren't they incredibly vulnerable to something like negative equity? You're putting them in a really scary situation.
Yes, I mean, that's a real value thing, is that there's a negative equity, especially also if they're buying a new home, because we know as soon as you buy a new property, and a lot of them are geared up for first-time buyers, that as soon as you get the keys, the property value goes down. But the government will be guaranteeing these mortgages, and also we know that what's different since the financial crisis in 2008, there's a mortgage affordability test that they've got to see. So they've got to really make sure they can afford those repayments, which will be quite high. So it's not everyone's going to be able to be eligible for these 99% mortgages.
So would you say only the top 3% currently in society, when we look at salaries, are going to benefit from this? Because I can't see people on wages. If we're looking at the average wage, it's 37,000. We're looking at that real top 3 to 1% of people that would even take this up.
No, I don't think so. I think it's probably people who maybe have got sort of maybe a longer term that they're going to be making more money in the future. I don't think it's going to probably help people in the London and the Southeast areas so much. Because the deposits are so high anyways, but also that whether they'll be able to get to lend. I do think there are programs out there that really will help first-time buyers, like the Lifetime ISA, where the government matches and give you a 25% bonus. So things like that, really, really good to get the deposit together. But I don't know, it might accelerate people who are looking to buy, that they can buy a little bit earlier. And you've got to remember then, they're not renting anymore. They've got their own front door. They might be able to sublet, and get that equity in their own house.
Paula, stay with us. We're just going to take a couple of calls now. Angela from Merseyside, what's your initial reaction when you hear about the possibility of a 99% mortgage?
Well, I think it's a headline that's sort of grabbing your attention really quickly. And basically, I need to see all the small print and not be sold something that's sort of glittered up, like your interest rate, how many years you've got on it, what sort of problems you could get in and on this as well. And to be truthful, I think it's a headline that's trying to grab votes here.
Of course it is. Angela, you're bang on. This is the Tories trying to win over the younger voters who they have completely sold down the river for the last 13 years. So I hope, younger voters, this is not going to solve your problems. You need a different government who are actually going to build some homes.
Do you know what I'm concerned about as well? I think you said previously that the government will 100% back this. So if we see swathes of people in 5 to 10 years that are hugely defaulting on these because they're really expensive, are we saying the government will then step in and we're going to see something reflective of the crash in 2008?
No, I don't think that's the case, really. So what it is, and it's happened with the Help to Buy. So we've had Help to Buy, which is was also guaranteeing 5% and a mortgage equity scheme to help people buy onto new build. But there is a huge risk of people going to negative equity, and they need to think longer term. But the lenders will not lend, or not be able to lend, unless the people can afford to lend to. But there is a real risk of negative equity, especially people looking to move quite quickly. But it won't be something like the financial crisis. That was an external crisis that happened. And that was when people were getting mortgages, over 100% mortgages, and they had no means of repaying them back, and interest-only mortgages.
What was interesting there actually is when Angela was saying, and you were all agreeing that actually this is just a way of getting the votes, getting younger people to vote Conservative. You were actually nodding along to that, Angela. Is that what you feel this is? Even though it might help a tiny percent of the population, Paula, sorry, a tiny percent of the population, you think that actually this is, the Conservative government are coming up with this in order to just attract the younger votes?
Well, now's the time, isn't it? So we're coming into election year. I always say that I think it's ridiculous that what they really need to do is to help the leaseholders, which are also first-time buyers. But really, fundamentally, the government has not been building enough homes for 20 years, 30 years. And that is a major crux of the problem. These types of measures, they're all piecemeal. They'll add to demand for housing, which we don't need more demand. We need more supply. But it's a really hard nut to crack, and it's really hard. We need to get national house building program again, because that's what we had before, and we can't expect the private house builders to take up the slack because they haven't.
Yeah. Do you know there was a stat that I heard which was awful, which was it was either when we were growing up or slightly before, so in the 70s or in the 80s, the most common living situation was husband, wife, kids, and now it is parents with their older kids.
Oh yeah, people are living with their parents much longer because they can't afford to the rent. They can't afford to get anywhere. They're saving up to.
I don't think we should criticise the fact that it's like for voters though, because I think we're going to see this from both parties. We're going to see.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be my next question. Is actually does it matter if it's going to help a small percentage of people? It'll help a small percentage.
But not if it's just headline.
But also not if it's then going to hinder a majority of people.
Well, yes. Peter from the West Midlands, what do you think? Do you think this is a policy that could help or hinder?
Well, my idea would be to reduce the price of housing of all properties by 50%.
Oh, Peter, I think homeowners everywhere have just winced. Toes have curled across the land.
No, it won't make any difference. Your debt will be reduced by 50%. Everybody will be on a level playing field.
Okay, so you would just take the whole economy and contract it, Lynn? How would that work out? Actually, I'm going to, Paula, I'll put that one to you. How would that work?
Nice idea to roll back time, but it's a bit tricky that you've got somebody who's been living the high life, has a very high mortgage, and then somebody who's, paid off their mortgage. And I don't think that would be you'd probably have to be putting money back into their pockets, really. I mean, fundamentally, there's high house prices because we don't have enough homes, enough right-sized homes. So it is true that our size of households have changed, but I think I haven't heard the stat about more adult children living with their parents, but the fact we've got a lot more single households, and our housing stock needs to reflect that. We need to build the right types of houses for the right people in the right places. And these are houses that people who live in the UK should be living in. And that's why, fully support. And what we've had in the past is to have extra taxes, extra stamp duty on people who are buying a home to rent out, or investors or foreign overseas investors. So I think that all that stuff is supported to help the people who are living in the UK buy a home to live in. And that's what we support.
Peter, your policy is interesting. I mean, it would be terribly, terribly unfair, but the way the economy naturally does that is obviously by a housing bubble, and then that bubble bursts and everybody's house prices go down, but that will leave a lot of people in negative equity, and that tends to be the ones that are first-time buyers. That tends to not be the people with huge portfolios in property that they can take the risk across that. So I don't know, Peter, with that in mind, 99% mortgages that could lead to something like that, is that a good idea?
You're not getting what I'm saying.
Okay, well, try again.
Okay, I'm suggesting that we reduce all properties by 50%.
Got that
Everybody.
Bit. Yes.
Yeah? The mortgage people and all that, their assets will go down by 50%.
Yes.
And therefore then, first-time buyers, would be able to afford these properties. Yeah,
the problem, Peter, is the people that have already paid off their mortgage. How fair is that on them that the asset they have
would still be there, if not worse?
Yeah, it's going down by 50%. I think it just needs, there's a few things that just need to be worked out in your policy.
Yeah, there's a difficulty that unfortunately we rely on our houses, our pension, our asset, and if you're, when you're downsizing, and I think you'd be stripping out, I think you'd have a lot of people there who would be in dire straits if you took out 50% of the house that they legitimately bought and paid off.
Peter, thank you though for your call. Matthew from Hampshire, what's your thoughts on a 99% mortgage? Do you think that would help the housing issue that we've got?
Not 99%. I think that it should be much lower, like 39.5%, or maybe even reaching sort of just on 40, but 99. I think if somebody lost their job, or they got into massive financial trouble with like it was their banks or building society, and they couldn't repay off their monthly repayments, I think they'd end up in negative equity, and I think they would end up really, and they could end up like.
Matthew, you're absolutely right. If you're taking out a 99% mortgage, it probably does make you more vulnerable if you were to lose your job, if interest rates were to go up, if house prices were to go down. All of these things could be quite troublesome, but we already have 95% mortgages, and about 40,000 people, I believe, have taken that up, and they seem to be working out. So what's a 4% difference?
To add, Matthew, you suggesting 40% or 39%, the deposits will be absolutely catastrophic.
Astronomical, yeah.
I think that, 99%, I think that it's just too high. I think that if, say, like you've got a family and there's 2 or 3 people in a family, and, with the job situations going on at the moment, and 2 people with all these jobs going on, modern technology into AI, and if they suddenly lost their jobs.
Got you, Matthew. You said that. Yeah, Matthew, I hear you. It is just a bit risky. I get it. Thank you for your call. Ellis from West Yorkshire, do you think it's too risky to be offering out 99% mortgages?
No, I think it's more risky having a whole generation after generation not being able to afford to get on the housing ladder. Like my daughter's 19. She's got no jobs. I owned my first property when I was 19. But what they could also do, I used to have my own mortgage broking company. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing they could do is take account of people paying rent rather than mortgages. So if you prove that you've met your rental payment for the last 2 years, give them the mortgage, because the rental payments are often more than what the mortgage is going to be.
Well, I am presuming, Ellis, part of this whole process would be you would have to prove a track record of being able to pay something like rent, because you're absolutely right. A lot of people are paying rents that are akin to most people's mortgages now. The rents are just astronomical.
I had people so frustrated because when I used to try and get them a mortgage, and this is going back 15 years, they'd say, look, my rent's £700 a month. The mortgage is only going to be £400 a month, but they won't give me the mortgage because they wouldn't take that into consideration.
You can imagine that is very frustrating. Paula, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's that's exactly right. 10, 15 years ago, that was the case, but things have changed now, and they will take into account rent. And also, there are other schemes out there that I think the good thing about the 99% mortgages is to help people who can't get that deposit together, because it's 100% of their wage. But it's really, really important to make sure you do do your sums and do what's right for you. So I think getting a mortgage broker is a really good first step as well.
Do you think, Ellis, though, maybe there's too much of a feeling that owning a house is a right, that we should all have a right to own a house, or it is something that, you haven't, if you've not bought a house in your 20s, that for some reason we all think, oh, well, they've not quite hit that target, or are we being unrealistic in society now? Maybe we need to change our perspective on home ownership.
I think it's to do with security. I lived in Spain, and you can't be chucked out. If you've paid your rent, you cannot be chucked out. You can here.
Well, then maybe that's a reason to tighten up, renters' rights.
Yeah, but then renting wouldn't be so horrible for people, because then they wouldn't be so desperate to buy the.
What if I need the house back? You said in Spain that if someone pays their rent, a bit like what we're seeing suggested in the renter's bill, no fault evictions. What if I own that property and I fall into hardship? I need to move back into the house I own. I wouldn't be able to move that tenant out. Do you think that's right?
Well, people going to being landlords know that. And they just have to wait for them to go, or they
10, 20 years.
They have to give them, but that's the risk. That you have to decide what society you want. If you want people to have security,
well, you would have less landlords presumably, or they would be more council-owned properties. Paula.
Yeah, or there's also there's quite a good sort of initiative in moving into build to rent. So actually having professional landlords. So longer rental contracts. So you can actually sit there, exactly how much the rent is, and that's starting to happen in some of the major cities. So something like that, you have professional landlords. And then how much you can save for a deposit. So I completely agree that people need to. It's up to their own choice, but. in Britain, we seem to like the homes that we live in, and we like to seem to own them. So it's hard, but there's lots of benefits of renting. You know, you can pick up and move, do something else, move into the right sized house for you. So there's definitely pros and cons. We do need to reform the rental market as well.
I think following from what you said, Storm, about we have this entitlement of owning a home, do you think a lot of the supply is due to we are operating in a single-minded society? Years ago, 20, 40, 50 years ago, you would buy within a couple. So there wouldn't need to be this, you know, all women now, I want to buy my house first before I get married, or men wanting to do it alone. There's all this single level of culture of which is driving up the demand as well. Do you think the culture changing?
I think it's also down to people hoarding properties. Think about people who have a whole portfolio of proproperties. I think they're more.
What's hoarding? What figure would you say?
A portfolio. I'd say.
I have a portfolio. I don't think I'm hoarding.
I think multiple ownership portfolios are driving this housing crisis.
But then we've also heard from Paula that if we have if you have people that have property portfolios, that it would be much easier to give longer term lets to people they could take far more risk on. Sorry, Paula, I'll let you answer that question initially.
I was going to say that there is an issue that on the other side is that we've got people in, you know, sort of living in big properties, family houses, and they can't downsize. And there's a lot of barriers to helping to get them to downsize. And a lot of it is that we're not building the right type of houses for them. We're not building the bungalows. They've got nowhere to move to, and they've also got quite big stamp duty costs as well. So people moving up and down, so people who've maybe got a couple of children want to move up, they won't move because they've got to spend tens of thousands of pounds in stamp duty. So which is why I think it's really important we can carry on with our campaign to abolish stamp duty for anyone buying a home to live in. Not people who are buying homes for rental or second homes, all that, but for buying a home to live in. Why are we taxing people to move, which is what we want people to move to the right side houses?
I agree.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to the calls. Graham from Lincolnshire, what's your thoughts on 99% mortgages, what we're talking about here? How do we solve the housing crisis?
Well, in 1975, I lived in Richmond in Surrey. And when we got married, we couldn't afford to buy a garage. We were laughed out the estate agents because we didn't have the money. But at that time, the GLC were giving 100% mortgages at fixed rate if you moved out of London. And that's what we did. We moved up to Milton Keynes and we were allowed up to £10,000.
Okay.
And that put us onto the market by doing that, you know.
So you're pro this policy then? You think this is a good idea?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, yeah.
And what about Sorry, Graham, what about the criticism that this is just going to drive up, you know, demand for houses, is going to drive up house prices even further, potentially causing another one of these sort of credit crunches?
Well, I think, you know, it may drive up prices, but that's the way the market goes, isn't it? But if it's going to get people onto the housing ladder, then I'm all for it, because that's what happened to us. But we'd still be renting now if it hadn't have been for the GLC. I'd say it was 100% mortgage and it was at a fixed rate.
And I support that. I support people getting on the ladder, and if it does help a small portion, it's just what is it going to do to the rest of society?
And it has just, you know, we do have 95% mortgages, and that seems to be going.
But that's a bit like when, if you're just focusing on a very small group, that's like Thatcher when she sold off the housing stock. So all those people benefited from that right to buy their council house. But then other people, we've actually never recovered because we never replenished that stock.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, Graham. Thank you so much for your call. A huge thank you to Paula Higgins for joining us on that debate.